because if we tried to expand NATO into Ukraine, then Russia would take back Crimea and Donbass. Initially, they just took back Crimea. There was a Ukrainian civil war that broke out in the Donbass that lasted from 2014 to 2022. Putin made several attempts to try to negotiate, over a 15-year period. He tried to resolve the Ukraine and NATO crisis peacefully through diplomatic means from 2007 to 2022. That included two different iterations of Russian mutual security agreements with both both the U.S. and NATO, and those were given to us in 2009 and then in December 2021. And lastly, he on December 7th, 2021, President Putin talked to President Biden on the phone and offered to not invade Ukraine and guaranteed they would not invade Ukraine, providing that he received a U.S. written guarantee from the United States that Ukraine would never join NATO.
Prove to me that you are alive.
And we are recording. Welcome everyone to the Prove to Me that You're Alive livecast. I'm gonna skip the intro today because the situation in the world is getting more and more crazy. And every time I, try to invite these so-called geopolitical experts to come and talk to the people, come and talk to the regular guy, because this is where we live. We are the people. Come talk to us. They run the other way. They run the other way because they know that we're gonna ask them unconventional questions that they can't just read off a speech or practice for. But one person answered the call, and he's here. And I can't be more honored, more privileged. Today's guest is a true hero to us, the people. David Pyne is president of Task Force on National and Homeland Security, a former U.S. Army HQ staff officer, National Security Strategist, military historian, geopolitical expert, and an all-around cool guy. David, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on your show.
Thank you so much for being here. I just read, your who you are off a piece of paper, but what we like to do on this show is to kind of get the human being behind all of your qualifications and careers. So maybe in short or in long, whatever, David, if you could tell us, the people, a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What was your childhood like? And what led you to the career path that you have been living in?
Yeah, you bet. I'll try to keep it a little brief. So I was born in South Korea. My dad was serving U.S. military intelligence during the Vietnam War, and moved around, grew up in California, decided to become an Army officer. So I went to BYU Army ROTC, joined and contracted in 1987, and was in kind of an advanced program. And I commissioned in 1992 as an armor officer, served from 1992 to 95 in uniform with M1 Abrams tank platoons. And then I decided to move to, I did a couple graduate schools. My second graduate school was at Georgetown University and School of Foreign Service. Highly prestigious program to get a master's in national security studies. It's I've been told it's a prime recruiting ground for like CIA and administration officials, essentially, folks in that think tanks, things of that nature. And then I served in a number of capacities in the Department of Defense, Department of the Navy. My favorite job was as international programs manager in the Department of the Army headquarters from 2000 to 2003. where I represented the Army on various DoD delegations, Department of Defense delegations across the world. I was in charge of Army R&D research and development cooperation with the Middle East, former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, and the Americas and Africa. So I had a really broad portfolio. And I traveled to Africa, South America, Canada, and Israel, among other countries, doing these cooperative negotiations for arms cooperation. And also served the Missile Defense Agency as kind of an lead consultant. And then I moved back west to be closer to family, and been a veterans leader here in Utah as a vice president of two veterans associations, and worked for Senator Mike Lee, who was senator-elect at the time, right before he was sworn in as a senator, as his national security policy director, and got involved in the task force on national security, served in multiple capacities, most recently, of course, as president. And I've written this blog on the Real War newsletter. I also I've got over 100 articles there, and the articles that I write are real think pieces. They're not like I've deliberately avoided the short articles that most people write, national security experts write, and The Hill and various other news agencies have articles 700 to 800 words that sometimes they have good titles, but they really don't say anything. You just can't say much of value within a couple pages like that. And so I like to have I talk about the threats, this war in Ukraine, of course, and potential war with China over Taiwan as the two greatest threats that America is facing right now in the world, in terms of peace and international peace and stability. But I also like to have real world solutions. And those solutions are based on diplomatic negotiated compromise agreements, principally with the PRC and the Russian Federation.
First of all, your resume blows my mind. I can't believe that one human being can accomplish all it is in one lifetime. I said this off air. I want to say this on air, that on behalf of the people, on behalf of myself, I want to thank you so much for doing this. And I have to give you a compliment, because I was born and raised in Western Ukraine. I immigrated to America when I was a teenager. I grew up in New York. And a lot of the times when I listen to these so-called experts on Ukraine and Russia, I'm screaming at the screen, because I'm like, you don't understand the Russians. You don't understand Ukrainians. But then there are few people like you that I can listen to and say, you know what, this guy actually knows what he's talking about. This guy actually has a sense of, what the people on the other side are going through. David, what is more important today, the conflict in the Middle East or what we have going on with Russia and Ukraine?
It's definitely what we have going on with Russia and Ukraine, because there's there's a rough balance of power in the Middle East. Israel, of course, is likely the fourth largest nuclear power in the world, behind the U.S. It would be actually Russia. This is the largest, followed by China and the U.S., and then Israel. So Israel has about 400 nuclear weapons, and I assess that Iran is also likely a nuclear power, but they may only have a dozen nuclear weapons. So there's kind of a desire between Israel and Iran to limit the potential for a nuclear war. But in terms of with regards to Ukraine, what I call Biden's proxy war against Russia and Ukraine that he essentially provoked with Russia, there's no real sense of the need to avoid a nuclear escalation. We see Biden and his neocon Republican allies in Congress continually calling for further and further escalations, saying that Putin is bluffing. He'll never escalate the nuclear level, and we can safely violate every Russian red line that Putin articulates. But what they don't realize is, game theory postulates that the more red lines of a nuclear adversary you violate, the closer you bring yourself to nuclear war. Where eventually you're going to reach that sweet spot where that's their true actual nuclear red line, and you may not know about it until there's mushroom clouds detonating over your country. So, or in the case of NATO, your alliance. So that is the very real risk we face right now. I'm sure we'll discuss it further, but Russia used this IRBM, this very advanced new IRBM, the oreshnik IRBM against Ukraine, the Dnipro aerospace factory, and very substantially damaged. It has deep penetrating warheads and submunitions. Six warheads, MIRVed, or actually likely maneuverable reentry vehicles that it boasts on a missile that's 3,100 miles range, and each one of those warheads had 6 submunitions that have were essentially kind of rods of God type of thing. They didn't have any conventional explosives, but they were able to destroy much of the plant using just the Mach 10 velocity, essentially. So very effective weapon that can penetrate NATO underground bunkers and could potentially take out Zelensky himself in his underground bunker below the presidential palace in Kyiv.
I want to get into all of that a little later. I have to thank you again for being brave and going against the agenda and bringing us this information. There's a lot of talks with Ukraine becoming an American colony in 2014, the CIA getting involved in Maidan coup and everything like that. I was born and raised there. I remember after the collapse of the Soviet Union, as far as I'm concerned, America never left Ukraine nor Russia. The Ukrainian constitution was given by America. If people don't know, the Russian constitution was written and assisted with by the Americans. So how did we get here? Where am I wrong? Where am I right? How did we get to this point, and what don't the average person understand with all of this mass media nonsense?
Prove to me that you are alive.
Well, the first thing to understand is that the Soviet leadership under Mikhail Gorbachev, General Secretary Gorbachev, president of the Soviet Union, deliberately made a decision to collapse the Soviet Union and to unilaterally withdraw from the entire Soviet Empire, which included 21 nation states. Once the independence of all those nations were achieved, including the Russian Federation. And so that's something that we've never seen in modern world history, where an empire voluntarily, collapsed its empire, as the Soviets did. And it was a gesture of peace. It was a gesture of peace and unity with the West. The prime objective, as we've learned from President Vladimir Putin during his interview with Tucker Carlson, was to pursue a policy of convergence with the West. It was a policy where Russia attempted to, integrate with the economy of, European economic and security infrastructure. That would include the European Union, some kind of arrangement between the European Union and the CIS, the Commonwealth of Independent States, that would have provided kind of a common house in terms of, economic integration, but also, a collective security organization that would be, ideally would have replaced NATO or would have included NATO. It could have been NATO expanding to include the Russian Federation, because we had 3 successive Russian leaders that proclaimed their willingness to have Russia join NATO, and that was Gorbachev himself. I think it was in 1990. Then it was Yeltsin in 91, and then subsequently Putin in both 2000 and 2002 with Clinton and George W. Bush. So Russia was they were attempting to promote world peace, promote integration with the West, and with the exception of the kind of the joint NATO-Russia Council that was formed in 1997, I believe. all of those attempts were repudiated. And so what happened was President George W. Bush made clear his intention to have Ukraine and Georgia be invited to join NATO in 2007. And that was formalized in 2008 with the Bucharest Declaration. And that was really the worst of both worlds for both Ukraine and Georgia, because there was no timeline for NATO, NATO ascension. But it put Russia on notice that we were attempting to expand our empire into their sphere of influence in Ukraine and Georgia, which were, Ukraine in particular was a red line, because it had the potential of, allowing U.S. nuclear missile or nuclear capable missiles or nuclear capable strategic bombers from being deployed within 300 miles of Moscow. And even with F-16s, we know that F-16s can be nuclear capable in the C and D version and more advanced versions, as they have been for many years with NATO countries, where we have kind of this, this dual use situation where, our NATO partners have a say, particularly Germany. We can deploy nuclear weapons on one of their fighters. And then if we jointly agree, we can, activate that nuclear weapon, and then either they or we can deliver that nuclear weapon in the case of a war with the Russian Federation. So, that's a very dangerous situation. It was viewed as an existential threat by Putin. And, once the Maidan coup occurred in 2014, that was really, the implementation of the Bucharest Declaration, where the U.S. again wanted to expand its liberal empire, of which NATO is the predominant faction, essentially military protectorates of the United States. Some in Russia refer to some NATO member states as U.S. satellites. I think that's largely accurate. So, we transformed all 6 Warsaw Pact Soviet satellites into U.S. satellites by 2004, including the Baltic states. The Baltic states, being former Soviet republics. So that was viewed as an act of aggression, essentially, along with, of course, our bombing of Yugoslavia, which was a Soviet ally, Serbia in particular. Not just a Soviet ally, but a Russian ally in 1999. I was actually in Washington, D.C. That's when I first moved to Northern Virginia, where I saw that. And, that continued with, of course, our regime change wars in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan and Libya. Libya, of course, being a NATO act of aggression, where we bombed Libya to overthrow longtime Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. And, it became clear that NATO had transformed from a purely defensive alliance, as it was during the Cold War, into more of an aggressor and expansionist alliance. And so that was very alarming to Russian leaders, in particular Vladimir Putin. And he did exactly what he promised that he would do to George W. Bush, which is, if we try to expand NATO into Ukraine, then Russia would take back Crimea and the Donbass. Initially, they just took back Crimea. There was a Ukrainian civil war that broke out in the Donbass that lasted from 2014 to 2022. Putin made several attempts to try to negotiate, over a 15-year period. He tried to resolve the Ukraine and NATO crisis peacefully through diplomatic means from 2007 to 2022. That included 2 different iterations of Russian mutual security agreements with both both the U.S. and NATO, and those were given to us in 2009 and then in December 2021. And lastly, he on December 7th, 2021, President Putin called or talked to President Biden on the phone and offered to not invade Ukraine and guaranteed they would not invade Ukraine, providing that he received a U.S. written guarantee from the United States that Ukraine would never join NATO. And as we've learned since, the U.S. is apparently opposed to Ukraine joining NATO, yet they will not publicly admit that to Russia. And that is the most fundamental condition that the Russian government has stated that they needed to hear to not invade, and of course, for any peace agreement, it has to be, neutrality for Ukraine, particularly neutrality outside of the NATO alliance. So there were a couple other factors, of course, but essentially, this war it's not being fought over territory. Fundamentally, it's not being taught over territory. Territory has become a secondary concern, but initially, it was not a war over territory, but rather over the geopolitical orientation of the Ukrainian state. And Russia is fighting this war to restore Ukraine's pre-2014 neutrality. It's not trying to transform Ukraine into an annexed republic of Russia. It's not trying to transform it into a Russian satellite state or a military protectorate or anything like that. It's not even trying to overthrow the Ukrainian government. It did initially during the first almost 2 weeks of the war. It wasn't until March 7th of 2022 that it decided that Russia offered to keep Zelensky as president as part of any peace deal. Prior to that, they insisted that Zelensky be replaced with someone who supported the Russian position of neutrality for Ukraine.
Thank you for that. Before we go on, I have so many questions to ask you. You are very well studied, very well traveled. You have a cool head on your shoulders. We've been drawn this caricature of Vladimir Putin, like this boogeyman, this insane 21st century Hitler 2.0. To you personally, what do you think of Vladimir Putin?
Prove to me that you are alive.